Margaret, I need to tell you something that I should have said 43 years ago. The words hung in the air of their suburban kitchen like a confession waiting to shatter everything they had built together. Robert Mitchell sat across from his wife at the same maple table where they had shared thousands of meals, his weathered hands trembling around a coffee cup that had long gone cold at 72 years old. Robert looked every day of his age and then some. The weight of 4 decades of living a lie had carved deep lines around his eyes and bent his shoulders with the burden of secrets. But today, something fundamental had shifted in his posture. For the first time in decades, Robert Mitchell was sitting up straight. "What is it, honey?" Margaret asked, setting down her crossword puzzle with the careful attention she gave to everything Robert said. Even after all these years, she listened to him like his words mattered, like his thoughts were precious enough to deserve her full attention. "I'm gay, Margaret." The words came out barely above a whisper, but they echoed through the kitchen like thunder. "I've been gay my entire life, and I've been lying to you, to our children, to everyone for 43 years. Margaret's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. She stared at Robert as if he had just announced he was from another planet, her mind struggling to process information that fundamentally challenged everything she thought she knew about her life. "You're what?" Margaret's voice was so quiet Robert had to strain to hear it. The word gay seemed to stick in her throat like something foreign and impossible. Robert forced himself to meet her eyes, to witness the exact moment when 43 years of shared history began to crumble. "I'm homosexual, Margaret, I always have been. I married you because that's what men like me did in 1980. We got married, had children, built respectable lives, and buried the truth so deep, we sometimes forgot it existed." Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, hurt, anger, like watching someone flip through channels trying to find something that made sense. "But gay, Robert, you can't be gay. We've been married for 43 years. We have 3 children together. We've had a sex life." The word decide hit Robert like a physical blow. "Margaret, I didn't decide anything. I've known what I was since I was 14 years old and realized that while my friends were fantasizing about girls, I was fantasizing about boys. I've spent 58 years of my life fighting against something that was never a choice." Robert stood up from the table, his arthritis protesting the sudden movement, and walked to the window that looked out over their carefully maintained backyard. "Do you remember when Tommy was 16 and he asked me what it felt like to be in love with you? I told him it was like finding the missing piece of himself. But Margaret, I lied to our son. I've never felt that way about any woman, including you." Margaret's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up abruptly, her face flushed with a mixture of humiliation and rage. "So, our entire marriage has been a lie. Every time you touched me, every time you said you loved me, every anniversary, every Valentine's Day, all of it was just you pretending." Robert turned to face his wife, seeing the devastation in her eyes, and knowing that nothing he said could ever repair the damage he was inflicting. "Not a lie, Margaret, a performance, one that I convinced myself was real because the alternative was too terrifying to consider." Margaret snatched a wedding photograph from the counter, her movements sharp with anger. "You stole 43 years of my life, Robert, 43 years I could have spent with someone who actually wanted me, who actually loved me the way a husband should love a wife." "You're right," Robert said simply. There was no defense for what he had done, no justification that could minimize the magnitude of his deception. "I stole your life, and I stole mine too. I turned both of us into characters in a play neither of us auditioned for." Margaret's anger seemed to deflate as suddenly as it had erupted, leaving behind something that looked like exhaustion mixed with grief. "Robert, I don't understand. How does someone live a lie for 43 years? How does someone fake an entire life? Because the alternative felt impossible. Margaret, when I was growing up in the 1960s, being gay wasn't just taboo, was criminal, it was classified as a mental illness. It meant losing your job, your family, your place in society. It meant being completely alone. But that was 50 years ago," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "Things changed. Society changed. Why didn't you tell me when it became safe?" Robert's laugh was bitter and full of self-recrimination. "Because by then, I had built a prison so elaborate I couldn't figure out how to escape it. We had children who looked up to me. I had a career, a reputation, a role in the community. I had convinced myself that the lie had become the truth. So what changed? Why are you telling me this now? Why today, after all these years?" Robert's composure finally cracked completely. "Last month, when I had that heart attack and they told me I might not survive the surgery, I realized I was about to die without ever having lived authentically for a single day. I lay in that hospital bed thinking about what my life would look like if someone wrote my obituary. Honestly, doubt the tears came then. Decades of suppressed emotion pouring out like water through a broken dam. They would write about my career in accounting, my service on the church board, my devotion to my family. But the real Robert Mitchell, the man who dreamed about holding another man's hand, who never felt more alive than in those brief moments when I allowed myself to acknowledge who I really was, that man would die without ever having existed." Margaret watched her husband cry with the same careful attention she had always given him. But now there was something different in her expression, not just hurt and anger, but a dawning understanding of the magnitude of the tragedy they had both been living. "I need to ask you something, Robert, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have there been other men? During our marriage, have you been unfaithful?" "3 times, he said quietly. "Once in 1995 when I was traveling for work. Once in 2003 at a conference in Chicago. And once 2 years ago when I thought I was dying and couldn't bear the thought of never knowing what it felt like to be touched by someone who actually wanted me." Margaret's shoulders sagged, as if she had been carrying a heavy weight and had, finally, been given permission to set it down. "I knew," she said so quietly, Robert almost didn't hear her. "I didn't know what I knew, but I knew something was wrong. The way you looked at other men sometimes. The way you seemed to disappear inside yourself during intimacy." She turned back to face him, and Robert was struck by how different she looked. The woman who had been his wife for 43 years was still there, but now there was something else, a strength he had never seen before, born from having her worst fears confirmed and discovering she could survive it. "I used to think there was something wrong with me," Margaret continued. "I thought I wasn't attractive enough, or passionate enough, or interesting enough to hold your attention completely. I spent decades trying to be better, trying to be enough for you. Never understanding that the problem wasn't that I wasn't enough, it was that I wasn't a man." Margaret walked back to the table and sat down, but this time she pulled her chair closer to Robert instead of farther away. "Robert, I'm 68 years old. I've spent my entire adult life loving a man who could never love me back the way I needed to be loved. But you know what the strangest part is? For the first time in 43 years, I feel like I'm talking to my husband instead of the character he's been playing." She reached across the table and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "This conversation, as terrible as it is, feels more real than anything we've shared in decades." "What happens now?" Robert asked. "How do we move forward from this? How do we tell the children?" Margaret was quiet for a long time, her thumb absently stroking the back of Robert's hand. "I don't know what happens now, Robert. I need time to process this, to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be enough for someone who could never want me. I need to grieve the life I thought I had and figure out if there's any way to build something real from what's left. But I know one thing," she continued, meeting his eyes directly. "You're 72 years old, and you've never been in love. You've never felt desired by someone who could actually desire you. You've never known what it's like to be completely, authentically yourself with another person. That's not just tragic for me, it's tragic for you too. Margaret, I don't even know how to be gay. I don't know how to meet people, how to date, how to navigate a world I've been hiding from my entire life. What if it's too late? What if I've waited too long?" Margaret smiled for the first time since their conversation began, but it was a sad smile full of complicated emotions. "Robert, it's never too late to start living authentically. You might be 72, but you're not dead, and there are other men your age who are probably in similar situations. But first, we need to figure out how to be honest with our children. They deserve to know the truth, even if it's going to be devastating for them, and we need to figure out how to end our marriage with as much dignity and kindness as possible." As the afternoon sun slanted through their kitchen window, Robert and Margaret Mitchell sat at their maple table and began the long, painful process of dismantling a life built on lies and trying to construct something real from the wreckage. Neither of them knew what their future would look like, but for the first time in 43 years, it would be built on truth. The Sunday dinner that would change the Mitchell family forever began like every other family gathering they had shared for decades. Lisa arrived first with her husband David and their twin daughters. Tommy came next with his longtime girlfriend, Sarah. Michael, the youngest at 38, showed up last with his fiancée, Jennifer. It's slightly out of breath from rushing over after their wedding planning session. "So what's the big announcement?" Lisa asked, cutting into her pot roast. "Are you two finally going to take that European cruise you've been talking about for 20 years? Robert and Margaret exchanged a look that didn't go unnoticed by their children. They had spent the week, since Robert's revelation, planning this conversation, trying to find words that could possibly soften the impact of what they were about to reveal. "Actually," their father said, setting down his fork with hands that trembled slightly, "your mother, and I need to tell you something important, something that's going to be difficult to hear and even more difficult to understand. I'm gay," he said simply. "I have been my entire life, and I should have told you decades ago. Your mother and I are getting divorced because I can no longer live a lie that has been unfair to all of us." The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa's fork clattered against her plate as it slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. Tommy's face went through a series of expressions like someone trying to solve an impossible equation. Michael looked from his father to his mother and back, again, as if expecting someone to reveal that this was an elaborate joke. "Dad. That's not possible," Lisa said, her voice sharp with anger. "You can't just decide you're gay at 72. That's not how sexuality works." You've been married to Mom for 43 years. You have 3 children, and performed the role of a straight man so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. Robert interrupted. Lisa, I didn't decide anything. I've been fighting against my nature for over 50 years, and I'm tired of fighting. Tommy leaned back in his chair, his analytical mind trying to process information that challenged everything he thought he knew about his family. Dad, if this is true, then what about Mom? What about our entire childhood? What about all the advice you've given us about love and marriage? Margaret spoke for the first time since the conversation began, her voice quiet but clear. Everything your father told you about love and marriage was advice he wished he could follow himself. He taught you to value commitment, honesty, and respect because those were the things he wished he could have given me. Mom, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. Are you okay? How long have you known about this? I found out last Sunday, Margaret replied. I've had a week to process what you're hearing for the first time. And to answer your question, I'm not okay. But I'm going to be okay eventually. Sarah, who had been dating Tommy for 6 years and had often expressed her desire for a marriage like his parents, looked like she was going to be sick. I don't understand. You two are the reason I believed. In true love, you're the reason I said yes when Tommy proposed. If your marriage isn't real, then what is? Sarah, our marriage was real in many ways, Robert said gently. The friendship was real. The commitment was real. The respect and care we had for each other was real. What wasn't real was the romantic love that should have been the foundation of everything else. But you had sex with her, Lisa said bluntly, her anger making her voice harsh. You had 3 children with her. You shared a bed for 43 years. How do you fake that level of intimacy? I didn't fake the intimacy, Lisa. I participated in it because it was what was expected, what was required to maintain the life I thought I needed to live. But it was never driven by genuine desire or authentic attraction. It was duty, responsibility, performance. David, Lisa's husband, leaned forward with a direct question. Robert, I need to ask this bluntly. Have you been with men during your marriage? Have you cheated on Margaret? Yes, Robert said simply. 3 times over the course of our marriage. Not because I didn't care about your mother, but because there were moments when the loneliness and the pretending became unbearable. Lisa's anger erupted like a volcano. You destroyed Mom's life. You destroyed our family. You made us all complicit in your lie, and now you want us to celebrate your authenticity. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I have 2 daughters who worship their grandfather. They think you and Mom have the perfect marriage. How am I supposed to explain to them that their grandfather is gay, and their grandmother has been living a lie? Michael, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. Dad, I'm getting married in 4 months. Jennifer and I chose our wedding vows based on yours and Mom's example. We've talked about wanting a marriage like yours for our entire relationship. What does this mean for us? Jennifer reached for Michael's hand, her face pale with the realization that their relationship template had just been revealed as fundamentally false. We've been planning a life based on what we thought was a successful 43-year marriage. If that was all performance, then what do we know about real love? I don't know what this means for your relationships, Robert said honestly. I hope it means that you'll demand more authenticity than I was capable of giving. I hope it means that you'll insist on being loved for who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. But Dad, Tommy said, his voice breaking slightly, how do we trust our own feelings now? How do we know when we're being authentic versus when we're performing? You convinced everyone, including yourself, that you loved Mom romantically. If you could be that wrong about something so fundamental, how can any of us trust what we think we feel? Tommy, you trust your feelings by not fighting against them the way I did. You trust them by not forcing yourself into boxes that don't fit. You trust them by being honest about what brings you joy and what feels like obligation. Sarah looked at Tommy with new uncertainty, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. How do I know you're not hiding something fundamental about yourself the way your father did? How do I know that the love you claim to feel for me is real and not just learned behavior? Tommy's face crumpled with the realization that his father's deception had poisoned his own relationship. Sarah, I'm not hiding anything. I'm not gay. I love you completely and authentically, but that's exactly what your father would have said to your mother. Sarah replied, her voice hollow with doubt. He would have sworn he wasn't hiding anything. He would have insisted his love was real. How? Is your word any different from his? The conversation continued for another hour, circling through anger, confusion, grief, and a profound sense of betrayal that extended far beyond Robert's marriage to Margaret. By the time their children left that evening, the Mitchell family, as they had known it, had effectively ceased to exist. Lisa left without saying goodbye to her father. Tommy and Sarah left together, but their conversation in the driveway was heated and full of accusations about honesty and trust. Michael and Jennifer drove away in complete silence, both of them apparently too shocked to process what they had learned. As Robert and Margaret cleaned up the dinner dishes in silence, The weight of what they had done settled over them like a heavy blanket. "Margaret," Robert said as he dried the last plate, "I think we need to prepare ourselves for the possibility that our children may never forgive us for this." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, but Robert, we couldn't keep living the lie. It was killing both of us, and it was setting an impossible standard for our children to try to live up to." She turned to face him, her expression resolute despite her tears. "We've hurt them terribly, but we've also freed them from the pressure of trying to recreate something that was never real in the first place. Maybe that's worth something, even if they can't see it now." 6 months after Robert's revelation, the aftermath continued to ripple through their extended family and community. Lisa struggled to explain to her daughters why Grandpa and Grandma were getting divorced. Tommy and Sarah entered couples counseling to work through the trust issues that Robert's deception had triggered in their relationship. Michael and Jennifer postponed their wedding, unsure whether they could trust their own feelings enough to make lifetime commitments. But slowly, tentatively, something unexpected began to happen. Robert, for the first time in his adult life, began exploring what it meant to be an openly gay man. He joined a support group for older men who had come out late in life, discovering that his story was far from unique. There were dozens of men, in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, who had spent decades living similar lives. The group became a lifeline for Robert, a place where he could speak honestly about the complicated emotions of coming out after a lifetime of deception. He learned that authenticity, even when it came at great cost, was still preferable to the slow death of living a lie. Margaret, meanwhile, began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping women whose marriages had ended due to their husband's homosexuality. She learned that her experience of feeling fundamentally rejected, despite receiving affection and care, was common among women in her situation. Gradually, Margaret began to reclaim her sense of self outside of her role as Robert's wife. She started taking art classes, something she had always wanted to do, but had never made time for. She reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during her marriage, discovering that she had interests and passions that had nothing to do with being half of a couple. One evening, Robert met William Chen at a coffee shop near the LGBT Community Center. William was 68, a retired teacher who had also come out late in life after his wife's death revealed to him that he no longer had to maintain his carefully constructed heterosexual facade. Their first conversation lasted for hours, covering everything from their shared experience of living in the closet to their mutual love of classical music and gardening. For the first time in his life, Robert felt the flutter of genuine romantic attraction combined with emotional connection. It was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying to discover, at 73 years old, what it felt like to be genuinely interested in another person. Margaret, surprisingly, was among the first to support Robert's new relationship. When he nervously introduced William to her at a family barbecue that Lisa had reluctantly agreed to host, Margaret welcomed him with genuine warmth. "I'm glad Robert found you," Margaret told William privately later that evening. "I can see him being himself with you in a way he never could with me. It's what I always wanted for him, even when I didn't understand what was missing." The Mitchell children took longer to adjust to their family's new reality. Lisa eventually brought her daughters to meet William. After months of preparation and family counseling, the girls were confused but accepting, more concerned with whether their grandfather was happy than with the gender of his partner. Tommy and Sarah worked through their trust issues and eventually married, but with a deeper understanding of the importance of authenticity in relationships. Their wedding vows emphasized accepting each other completely rather than trying to recreate someone else's relationship template. Michael and Jennifer resumed their wedding planning 6 months later, but with a completely different approach. Instead of modeling their relationship on Robert and Margaret's marriage, they focused on building something uniquely their own, based on honest communication and genuine compatibility. 1 year after Robert's revelation, the Mitchell family gathered for Christmas in a way they never had before, with Margaret bringing her new boyfriend, a widower she had met in her art class, Robert bringing William, and everyone making an effort to create new traditions that acknowledged their changed but still loving family structure. As Robert watched his grandchildren play with gifts under the tree, William's hand warm in his own, he felt something I had never experienced before: complete integration between his public self and his private truth. At 74 years old, he was finally living authentically, finally experiencing the kind of love that poets wrote about. "You know," he said to William as they sat together on the porch that evening, watching snow fall in the lamplight, "I spent 72 years thinking it was too late to change, too late to be honest, too late to start over. I thought authenticity was a luxury I had forfeited when I chose to build a life on lies." William, who had his own story of late in life self-discovery, nodded with understanding. "I think a lot of our generation believed that. We thought there was an expiration date on the possibility of being true to ourselves." Robert smiled, feeling genuinely content for the first time in his adult life. "Turns out the only thing that's ever too late is dying while still pretending to be someone you're not. Everything else, love, honesty, starting over, building something real of that is possible at any age, as long as you're brave enough to stop performing and start living. Lisa appeared at the door, her daughters trailing behind her. Dad, the girls want to say goodnight to you and William before they go to bed. As his granddaughters hugged both him and William with the easy acceptance that children bring to love in all its forms, Robert felt the final piece of his transformation click into place. He had lost a marriage built on lies, but he had gained a family learning to love authentically. He had destroyed his children's faith in perfect relationships, but he had given them permission to demand real ones. Most importantly, he had discovered that it was never too late to choose truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, real love over performed devotion. At 74 years old, Robert Mitchell was finally free to be exactly who he was meant to be, and that freedom was worth everything it had cost him to find it. The cost had been enormous: decades of deception, a shattered marriage, years of his children's trust lost and slowly rebuilt. But as William squeezed his hand and smiled at him across the room full of family members who were learning to love each other in new ways, Robert knew that authentic love, no matter when it came, was worth everything it had taken to find it.